Thanks for staying with us. This is Newsline. I'm Michael Chigani, and tonight a very special guest, as I said, Mr. C.Y. Leung, or Leung Chun-ying, who wants to be our next chief executive. I'm sure you hope you will be the next chief executive. We don't know at this point. And I hope that if you do ever become the chief executive, you'll come back to this show.
I will.
Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to move on. We talked about poverty, and I know that's a pet issue of yours. We're going to move on. Another very, very sensitive issue, and a lot of people are very bothered by this issue. They're worried by this issue, is the issue of mainlanders coming to Hong Kong. A few days back, there was an ad in one of the newspapers, a front page ad calling mainlanders locusts. Locusts, not a very flattering term. And some mainland professor, Professor Kong, has called us Hong Kong people running dogs. Yeah, I haven't seen this happen before. Something is happening, and people are getting fed up with mainlanders. How worried are you that this issue is going to blow up like a bomb?
I think we need to manage the situation. I believe that at the present, neither Professor Kong's view in Beijing about Hong Kong people
being dogs,
nor the views of some of us in Hong Kong, about mainlanders, mainlanders, are truly representative of the views of the people of Hong Kong, the people of the mainland, of each other. But as I said, we need to sort of manage the situation. We shouldn't be complacent. One country, two systems is a managed state. It is not a natural state. It is a designed state. I was heavily involved, as you know, in the basic law drafting process and also in the run-up between 1990 to 1997 as chairman of the vice chairman of the preparatory committee and so on. We need to be mindful of the possible friction, which is highly regrettable, between Hong Kong and the mainland. Competition for resources, for example. Now, whether it is gynecological services, healthcare for mothers and children, and maybe in a couple of years competition for places in nurseries and kindergartens. And that's why it came out quite early to say that we ought to have a population policy. In our population policy, we need to manage.
Henry Tang of not having a population policy.
We need to manage the entry of mainland pregnant mothers who are not wives of Hong Kong residents. I was the first one to come out to say this. Now, if you had done it a year ago, I think some of the views that Hong Kong people, particularly Hong Kong mothers, have of mainland mothers would probably ameliorate it.
So you think it would not have become as sensitive and explosive as
yes, now? I think we manage. We need to manage in all these areas.
But you keep on using the word manage. You have not told me how to manage the situation today. What you suggested a year ago didn't happen. But the situation today, I asked you whether this situation is explosive. Are you afraid that it is explosive?
We manage the situation by not adding fuel to fire. We are managing on both sides, the central government and the Hong Kong government, by coming out to say certain things to reassure the public.
But the public
for example,
is not reassured.
For example, a couple of days ago, the head of the central government's liaison office, Mr. Pang, came out and basically criticized Professor Kong of Peking University for calling Hong Kong people dogs. So as leaders of Hong Kong government and as leaders of the central government representing central government to soothe the situation. But let's look at this, Michael. If we carry on like this, without a comprehensive population policy, and you know, we have a population policy steering committee that was set up. And
Mr. Henry Tang, your opponent, was involved with that?
Set up 5 years ago. And the chief secretary at that time, Mr. Henry Tang, was a chairman of this committee. So far, 5 years down the line, we have not seen anything. Now, if
you're accusing him of failure.
If we had done something, particularly in the area of pregnant ladies coming to Hong Kong to give birth, competing for resources at the hospital level, at the mother and child care center level, and very soon at the nursery center level, and then at the kindergarten level, I think the situation would have become a bit better.
So, any reasonable person sitting here, Mr. Leung, will say that you're placing this blame of the explosive situation we now have on Mr. Henry Tang.
No, I'm not saying that. It's just a matter of fact. What I'm saying is that we should have the foresight of preempting certain situations from happening, and we should manage the situation.
Okay, now, locusts, running dogs, not very flattering terms, and as you say, the situation needs to be managed. Before I leave this issue, I'm going to ask you one more time, are you afraid it could blow up?
We shouldn't be complacent. And I think we need to use policies, and we need to communicate with the public. Let me say a couple of things to you as well. 内交, internal diplomacy, is my internal diplomacy is my area of interest. I've been saying this for quite a few years, and this is the management of this state of affairs between the two systems within the same country. I was in Beijing a couple of years ago explaining to the audience on the mainland why Hong Kong could not reciprocate when the central government gave us preferential treatment privileges under CEPA, because Hong Kong is a free port. And when the central government said we could export Hong Kong products to the mainland without having to pay duty as a preferential treatment, we can't reciprocate in that area. But we are patriotic, and we do help the development of the mainland in other areas. Now, these points have to be articulated to the people on the mainland, and communicate to them. So far, we are not doing enough. Now, before the changeover in 1997, I had two propositions which have been adopted and is now part of life in Hong Kong. Firstly, the PLA troops in Hong Kong should not be sort of walking the streets in Hong Kong like their British counterparts before 1997. That was one proposition, to manage the situation. Secondly, mainland domestic helpers should not replace the foreign domestic helpers post 1997, again to manage the situation. Now, these two propositions are now part of life in Hong Kong.
So that
helps the situation.
Control the situation.
So what I'm saying is that as people who want to lead Hong Kong government and lead the Hong Kong community, we need to have that foresight, and we need to convince the central authorities to be sensitive.
You think you can do that? You think you can?
I'm sure I can do that.
Okay. I'm going to remind you of something you said when you were last on this show, but I'll do that later on. You mentioned patriotism, and you mentioned your work in the handover period on the Basic Law and so on. There's this one question that baffles me, one issue that baffles me a lot. I'm going to ask you that. And I often hear, even just coming on to this show, somebody called up and said, I'm going to interview Mr. Siwa Leung, and just a little, an hour or two ago, and he said to me, you ask him this question. I said, okay, why is it that you often hear people say they don't trust you? Why is that? Can you answer why people are bothered about you being the next chief executive?
I think people who say this should come up with examples as to why they think I cannot be trusted. And if you read opinion polls,
they call you the cunning fox, the cunning wolf. Why is that? If
you read opinion polls, unless you do not trust the people of Hong Kong, and I do believe that people in Hong Kong are highly intelligent, and people trust me as the next chief executive. In fact, my net support rating is about 31 percentage points higher than the
So you can look at the camera and say, trust me, you are trustworthy.
This camera, yes, trust me, I'm trustworthy. I'm 31 percentage points in terms of net support rating than the next best candidate.
Okay, well, that's great. That's your plug there. That's the only plug you're going to get. Now, I'm going to ask you another question. You talked about you can convince the mainland government. The last time you were here, I asked you this question. If an issue arose and if Hong Kong's interest conflicted with that of the mainland's interest, would you stand up to Beijing? And you said yes, you would stand up to Beijing on behalf of Hong Kong people. Would you still do that? As chief executive, would you do that?
I will. I've done it many times in the past. And
so even if you are sitting there as the chief executive of Hong Kong, you're going to stand up to Beijing and say, no, I'm going to do it this way.
Well, part of the reason why we have kept our lifestyle unchanged and our freedoms preserved is due to my participation, people like myself, Hong Kong residents who worked on Basic Law, who worked on transition period to 1997, I have worked with the central government for a long time, and I know I have the trust of the central government. And this time round, and as prominent leaders of the central government have said publicly, they are prepared to allow CY Leung to run in the race.
So now you think Beijing is not going to make a choice, that the two of you will be able to compete fairly?
I think we should welcome it, the opportunity for two pro-establishment candidates to compete fairly.
You call yourself a pro-establishment candidate. I've just got a couple of minutes left. You know, if you become the chief executive, if you do win, how will you be different from the current administration? You know, you've got to tell the people how you will make things different. Your issues are different. How will you differ from, let's say, Donald Tsang?
Hong Kong people are looking for change, but not going to turn Hong Kong upside down. It's not going to be a revolution.
That's what people are afraid of.
That's what people are afraid of, but at the same time, people are looking for changes. If you look at our past 10, 20 years, we're falling behind Singapore in our economic development. 10 years ago, Singapore's GDP was half the size of Hong Kong. Now it's caught up with Hong Kong. Their GDP growth per annum in the last 20 years on average was about 2 percentage points higher than Hong Kong's. We have not utilized fully the support the central government has given us. We are now a year since...
So you're saying that the current administration led by Donald Tsang has not done its job?
I want to provide vision. I want to provide leadership. I want to provide...
Does the current administration have vision?
Well, I'm not commenting on other administrations. I'm saying what I shall bring to the people of Hong Kong. I'll be accountable to the people of Hong Kong, as I've done in this election, although the people do not have votes. I brought myself and my team to the people nearly on a daily basis.
Will you do things differently from Donald Tsang?
Well, I'm a different person. My style of leadership and my style of government will be different. I want to be more accountable. I want to be more proactive. I probably have a different way of looking at relationship between our industrial sectors and government.
Will you keep the same team as Donald Tsang now has?
Well, it's a question of discussing with the central government, which is
you make a clean sweep, make everything totally different.
No. I have my views. I don't think there will be sea change in government appointments.
No big changes.
I need to discuss it with central authorities.
Okay, last question. If you don't win, will you run in 2017 when there's going to be a free vote?
I'm going to win.
If you don't win?
Well, if it's not in my dictionary, I will win.
Will you, even if you do win, will you run again in 2017?
Well, I'll continue to serve Hong Kong in whatever capacity I'm needed in 2017.
Okay, well, so the one thing that I wanted to say that again is, if you do win, you're not going to make any big changes in the current government. There will be no sea change. Those were your words.
Stability and change at the same time.
All right, okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Good evening.